expeditiously.
Okay, thank you, Carl. We're really happy to have Chimene Schwach, if I can pronounce the name right, here today. She's going to be talking about her platform for the new 47th House District. Chimene has lived in Como for 13 years with her husband and I believe 2 teenage boys, which you can imagine also keeps her busy, who currently attend as CPS. She's been on the Boone County Central Committee since 2014. She's also chair of the 46th Legislative Committee, which will change its number, I believe. And she's a 4th Ward committee person and has held 3 terms. She was co-chair of Muleskinners in the past, and she's also been on the executive board for several years as well. So we're really happy to have Chimene with us today. And since I'm in the 47th, I'm particularly happy to hear about her platform and the borders of the 47th. Thank you, Chimene.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Chimene Schwach, and I like to hope your candidate for the 47th district. I really appreciate you all altering the meeting for me today. I do apologize. I had thought that I was meeting with the firemen by Zoom, but it turns out I'm meeting with the firemen in person at 1:30. And so it requires that I jump off of here and have time to drive to meet with them. So I do appreciate your flexibility on that. I also want to give a shout out because Carl was talking about candidates on the call, but Angela Peterson jumped on in there too. She's running for family court judge here in Boone County as well. I think that's everybody else who jumped on there. That's me going back to my old Muleskinners hat, like introduce the candidates. So I am running for what I like to call as the new 47th district. And the new 47th district, as you all are probably aware because you're savvy voters, we had redistricting and we've had several layers of redistricting since December. So the first layer was the House districts. For some, by the grace of the universe and everyone else, our bipartisan committee that was chosen to select redistricting actually managed to do it for the House districts for the first time, I think, ever. And Boone County, while it wasn't, for those of us who were already running and had declared in certain spaces, it turned out not to be quite as great, but Boone County came out smelling like a rose in the redistricting process. We got 4 seats, right? And you all are aware. So we have the 45, the 46, 47, 50, and 44. And of those districts, 44 is our only solidly red district. 47 used to creep out into multiple counties. And now 47 is all contained within Boone County. And our, it's kind of hard to describe the district, but the centralmost point is West Boulevard and West Broadway. That's where we start in the 4th Ward. And the 47th district encompasses all of Western Boone County. And then it takes in 2 precincts of the 5th, 1 precinct of the 2nd, and most of the precincts of the 4th Ward. So the way they drew it blue was they added central, what I like to call the heart and central Columbia into the mix. It is really 51%, 49%, 51% Democratic now, 49% GOP. The Democratic index is 54%, which is their predictive number that we could do. There's a lot of new construction out. Thank you, Dave, for putting in the legislative districts from Brianna. I think that's where you got it from Brianna's website. And I will tell you, when you go to the website, if you are looking for your district, please click on, if you don't click on the link in the chat, if you would please link on the place that says maps and my precinct and polling places, because if you try and use the link that says look up my elected officials, it links to the old SOS maps still. So you have to click on the maps and precinct part on the clerk's website. So we start at West Boulevard and Broadway. We head west across Broadway to Fairview Road. And I have the southern side of Broadway until you get to Fairview Road. I don't have the northern part, so the crossroads districts and shelter do not really, sometimes they do, like it kind of goes back and forth, but generally it's the south side of Broadway. I then it goes up Fairview Road to Worley, and then it goes down Worley, whereupon I have the south side of Worley and not the north side of Worley, and it takes in Smithton and Paxton Keeley, which are two CPS schools that fall within the 47th within Columbia. It then takes a little jog up the road. It goes west and heads up Creasy Springs Road and past North Stadium, just past the Knights of Columbus Hall up there. And then it goes all the way to Sturgeon, and it goes west and takes in Harrisburg, Rocheport, all the way down to Huntsdale. And then at Huntsdale, if you jump on the MKT trail, you can then follow the MKT trail, everything north of the MKT trail itself, and everything north falls within the 47th district. And you can follow that MKT trail all the way back up into central Columbia, just north of Thornbrook, and then follow it back over up to West Broadway. So it's kind of a crazy little, it takes a leap into the middle of the city. So like I said, the fourth ward makes up the densest population area, and that's what turns it blue. Those are the lines. And since there are so few of us, does anybody have any questions about that or anything that they want to say about the district lines before I go on? Yeah, Alice.
Good. Oh, sorry.
Or Carl, whoever. I thought I saw Alice raise her hand, but I don't know.
How changed is it, Chimene, from
So-
the previous district with Martha?
Okay, so I used to be in the 46th district, right? When I first declared in the fall, I declared for the 46th district, and all of the fourth ward was previously in Martha Stevens district in the 46th. And for some of you, like the fourth ward, many people think of the fourth ward as like the grasslands and right here in the old South, but it actually goes very far west, across over Broadway, and goes way out past the new, up Chapel Hill Road and way out there. So it covers a lot of ground. And what happened to Martha's district is that became the 45th, and there are two precincts from the fourth ward that are still in the 45th, and they all now go to Kathy Steinhoff, which encompasses all of Mizzou now, which didn't used to. And the 46th is now north of I-70, and that's David Tyson Smith. So I encourage you, if you are confused about where you think you might fall, to look on the Boone County Clerk's website, or you can call me. I'm happy to figure it out for you and let you know. Any other questions about the districts?
Interestingly, the box says reactions. My reactions is compact and contiguous.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So I will say the 47th is the second largest geographic area of the 5 seats that we have now in Boone County. So that aside, you all know me. I've worked in social services most of my adult life. Most recently, I've worked for the past few years for CASA, which is Court Appointed Special Advocates, as an advocate supervisor, working in the 13th Judicial Court on permanency for kids who've been taken into protective custody. So with that, that allowed me to really get a bird's eye view of what our foster care system looks like, what our child and abuse and neglect situation is, both in Boone County and the 13th Judicial Circuit actually covers both Boone and Callaway counties. So my picture is a little broader than just Boone, but and it's Boone County and Columbia are really nice because we have the children's services tax, and as you all know, that really funds a lot of our services for children. And so we are in a much better position than many areas around the state when it comes to child permanency and services for kids. And that said, we are in an abysmal place. So even with all of those really good services that we provide here, we are still behind the 8 ball in providing those services to kids. And we can talk about that a little more here in a few minutes. I grew up in Missouri. I grew up mostly in Kansas City, but I have lived in all the major cities, which is I graduated from high school in Kansas City and went to middle school there and elementary, but my preschool, early childhood education all took place in St. Louis, where my mom was in graduate school. And my family, my extended family, both my parents graduated from high school in Springfield, and my grandparents all lived there until they passed. So I spent summers in Springfield, and that alone, I feel like gives me a really good, like very different places, right? And now I live in Columbia, where I've lived for 13 years. So these are really, while we're all Missouri, very different spaces. And I feel like I've had that I really have a good grasp on those different spaces. I did actually graduate from Missouri State University back when it was Southwest Missouri State. So I'm a bear, I'm not a tiger. But that's all right. I have a long history of bears in my family as opposed to tigers. And now, my husband and I live here, like Alice said, we've lived here for 13 years. I have 2 teenage boys, one at Hickman and one at West Middle School. They have both attended elementary school for the most part at Our Lady of Lourdes Interparish School, or at Columbia Catholic, as some of you know it. And then we switched, to the public schools. And we're happy with the public school system. It's been great. It's been a really good experience for my high schooler, actually. We also have a dog, Remy, and everybody keep Remy in your thoughts because she's going to have shoulder surgery this Sunday. So that'll be a thing in my family. We are active parishioners at Newman Center. That said, I am a big D Democrat and have always been a pro-choice Catholic, and am a proud member of Catholics for Choice and have been for many, many years. I decided to run for office because I have been active in our community at both the city and county level. I sit on the the Boone County Judicial Law Enforcement Task Force. I'm on my 2nd term on that task force, and that task force looks at really how the jails treat, how our system treats prisoners and mental health conditions in prisoners, because of, as many of you may know, often our jails are our first line of mental health providers in our communities. And so that's what the Judicial Law Enforcement Task Force looks at. And at the city level, gosh, I do, I have been on many things, and I'm interested in school board and things like that, but I also do youth sports, and I am the president of the board for Blue Thunder Track Club. And I now chair a committee through the Community Foundation, where we provide scholarships. We have an endowed scholarship from a gentleman who used to live in Columbia that covers kids who ran track. So they're kids who ran track for Columbia Track Club or Blue Thunder Track Club and attend a high school in this town. And so I chair that committee as well now. And so I reach into various and sundry places within the community. It's not just politics, but working on, living in the city and working on things with the city and the county. It's been really clear over the past couple of years to me that the issues we all care about, education, economic growth, civil rights, reproductive justice, bodily autonomy, that over the past few years, these issues are all coming together at the state level, where we have some unprecedented attacks on our civil liberties. And unfortunately, the supermajority, has intervened to both take away local control and, to ignore things like voter initiatives, which cover some of our safety net things. So supporting people in our community means to me that defending the health safety net and fighting for reproductive justice, fighting for common sense gun laws. I'm proud to say I am a gun sense candidate for Moms Men Action, longtime member there. Supporting full funding for equitable public education that is culturally responsive to everyone and actually does not try to micromanage our teachers and their curriculum. It also means defending fair living wages for everyone, and affordable housing, and paid family leave, and protecting really our right to vote, which is a really big deal this year, given what just occurred in our legislature, and we can talk about that in a second too. And then, of course, advocating for LGBTQ and trans kids' rights. We had 18 attacks this year, 18 bills just specifically on trans kids in sports. I mean, just crazy stuff. So, as Democrats, we understand that we're under an antagonistic administration, but I think with these redrawn districts that for 22, we have the opportunity to break the supermajority, and we can put, we can't necessarily, even if we flip this seat, because this seat is considered red at this moment because 47 is Chuck Basie, even though he's termed out and it's an open seat. Once we flip this seat blue, and we'll have more leverage. This past year in the legislature, it was kind of interesting because we had so many Republicans step aside for either appointments or other jobs. We had leverage. The Democratic caucus actually had leverage for the first time, and we were able, while we couldn't pass things that we really necessarily wanted, we were able to stop some bad bills this year and negotiate. And that's what's important, that we begin to chip away at that, and that we be able to affect some change. So, I hope that, my campaign is grassroots, and I'm going to ask for all of you guys' support on that. But I do want to talk about, so those are the kinds of big things for my campaign. We have, I see Son was there. Let's hold on. I'm trying to follow the chat too. Okay, so there's not a question in there, but you feel free to put a question in the chat or just raise your hand and unmute if you want to talk about something specific. But I thought that I would go from here. Those are all my big picture things. I'm a big D Democrat, and I cover all the things that big D Democrats really generally want. But at the same time, I spent a lot of time at the legislature this year, and I spend a lot of time at the legislature every year, both lobbying and paying attention to bills and oh my gosh, I'm just losing my words now. Both testifying in front of Senate and House committees on bills that I think they need to hear from the people on. This year was kind of interesting. We had a lot of gridlock down there over things, and the bills that I was interested in and the bills that I testified about, a lot of times we had a lot of people show up and they still wouldn't even really let us testify too much. They were cutting off testimony and severely limiting people's times. And that's mostly because we have gridlock on the right side of the room, right? We have a lot of gridlock over there with the conservative GOP caucus really just throwing a wrench in everything this year. So the things that are important to me, like I talked about, I cut my teeth on reproductive justice, and I have been fighting for the right to protect Roe and the right to an abortion for decades. And I've been doing it since I was in high school. And it's been, as many of you know, and that we had the leaked documents from the Supreme Court, from SCOTUS, and they're going to overturn Roe. And it's, upsetting to say that out loud. It's upsetting for me to, even though I really have been on the front lines in that, working in the field, I actually sit on the board for Missouri Family Health Council. I'm the vice president of the board. Missouri Family Health Council is our Title X provider for the state because the state has never never been able to win that grant from the federal government. It's for the past 40 years, it's been Missouri Family Health Council. We served 44,000 patients last year. And it is important to me that those 44,000 patients actually be able to, we have been pivoting as a federal, we want those people to have access to healthcare, and we want it to be equitable, and then we want them to, and we want to be able to, if somebody's planning their family, whatever that plan is, we want them to know what all of their options are. And Missouri Family Health Council has been smack dab in the middle. We've been smack dab in the middle of this push and pull between federal law and state law since 2016, because we believe in abortion rights and we believe in giving people all of their options. And we've had to do some pivoting around that issue. So Roe falling is a horrible thing. But I will say that I have experience over the past, really since 2016, we have been seriously talking about what this looks like, what a post-Roe United States looks like. And here in Missouri, we have been functionally without Roe for quite some time because our legislature every session, puts up bills that like up to 33, we've had up to 33 bills in 1 year before just on abortion. And that kind of boggles my mind, that they are so intent on taking away bodily autonomy from people. And what we see the effect of that is that when they try and take away bodily autonomy from people who have uteruses and people who can get pregnant, is that they then move the needle over. And this year we saw for the first time an introduction to, and we did have this, they took it out, mid-session, but they wanted to criminalize parents of non-binary and trans kids for accessing healthcare and making healthcare decisions for their children. And in the end, they did take the criminalization of parents out of the bill, but they still left in criminalization of providers. And those bills did not pass this year, but we will see them again next year. And once Roe falls, we will begin to see more and more of these bills that attack both our right to privacy and our bodily autonomy, and families being able to make decisions for themselves about what is best for what happens medically for both their minor children and as adults. And that's just not, that's not okay. I don't know if folks are aware, you guys probably are, but our legislator only has one constitutional duty, and that's to pass a budget. And this year they almost didn't get that done because they were so bogged down fighting on what I call ideological points, because it's an election year and we got bogged down in the redistricting process. They just spend a lot of time doing things that they, putting their nose where they should and overreaching instead of uplifting the people in the state. So, healthy Missouri families and our trans kids, those are all things that are important to me. But I also want, like I said, we have a budget responsibility as legislators, and ensuring opportunities for all Missourians, to prosper through livable wages and benefits, including family leave and affordable housing, and supporting local businesses and investing in green energy where where it makes sense, and protecting farmland are also important so that we have economic security for our families here. And those things are important to me. And I think that we also saw this year as the legislature attacked our access to medical care, and they attacked our bodily autonomy and agency as adults, they also tried to attack our laborers and our workers and our working families. And Missouri has a lot of working families that, they've been chipping away at worker protections. The state overwhelmingly with the initiative, we rejected right to work. And as soon as we started to reject right to work, our legislature began fighting back against that and saying we didn't understand what we did. And, and when they couldn't repeal right to work and do that, what they did was they began to chip away at workers' rights. They make it harder for people for working people to, if there is if discrimination happens, it is now on the employee to say that, to prove that it was malicious and premeditated and intended. There's not like it, and that's just almost next to impossible now. So you will hear our HR folks and our labor attorneys talk about that. People come to them with horror stories about what's happening in their workplace, and those HR attorneys will say, that really is terrible, and we can't prove that it was malicious, or we can't prove because of these things that have happened and changes in the law, this is no longer a case that we can bring. And that is horrible. That's disgraceful that our legislature is trying to, is chipping away at workers' rights. They're also chipping away, in 2017, they gutted 2018, our prevailing wage. And while we still have prevailing wage, they have changed it so much that in many places, our unions can no longer, our union contractors can no longer even bid on things because they don't have, there's this thing called the Merrick average, but different counties have different rules now, and we didn't used to have that. We used to have statewide rules. Now we have different counties. So some counties, they just don't have enough workers. They don't have enough union folks at every different name for every different occupation within the union has to have a certain number of hours. And if they don't have that, then they don't get the prevailing wage. And so our legislature is doing everything it can to wipe out the safety net for our working families. And that's a problem for me. And then, I want to strengthen our communities, right? And we all need to feel welcome, and we need to feel safe. And to do that, we have to, our kids in public schools, and within the 47th, we have 3 school districts. We have Sturgeon, we have Harrisburg, and we have CPS. The kids in Rocheport, for some people wonder where they go to school, depends on what side of the highway they live on. Some of them go to school in Franklin, and then some of them attend CPS schools. But we need to fully fund our public education. One of the things that happened this past legislative session, one of the, what I like to say, high policy things that was good, is that they fully funded transportation for the first time for our K through 12 schools. And that's amazing, because it's going to allow, in some of our districts, it's going to make a difference, because they also hopefully they passed a bill, the governor has not signed it yet, switching the 70-30 match from for raising teacher salaries. So they switched it so the counties have a smaller amount. And in some of our smaller counties and smaller school districts, that transportation money actually takes, they no longer have to use it from their general revenue, and they may be able to make that match. And so in some of our smaller communities, those teachers will actually get a raise. So when we talk about we gave teachers a raise, we sort of gave them a raise, right? We changed the formula and boosted it up to a certain point. We're still 49th in the nation in teacher pay for starting salary. And I think we're at like 45th for teachers with experience. So we're still pretty low on the totem pole, and I don't know that it's enough to keep teachers in the state. We are hemorrhaging teachers, not supporting our educators, but it doesn't help when we don't support our educators, not only by not paying them, but we make their workplace untenable. We forget that our children's educational experience is tied dramatically to their teachers' work-life experience. And we need to be cognizant of that when we make public policy decisions about demanding where teachers be and trying to micromanage their curriculum. Because even if we pay them enough, if we micromanage their curriculum, and somebody literally, Chuck Basie literally wanted to tell my child right this year, his AP World History teacher, like what they could have as projects. That's crazy. That's not the legislature's job. It is not the legislature's job to micromanage curriculum choices. And thank goodness this year that bill didn't pass also. Also mostly because of gridlock. And in terms of strengthening our communities, we need to support our public schools and strengthening our communities. we have had an uptick in, Missouri is the Wild West in terms of gun laws. And like I said, I am a Moms Demand Action mom and have been for a while, and I am a gun sense candidate. I do come from a family that hunts and owns guns. My immediate family does not currently have any guns in the house, but I did grow up with guns in my home and guns in my extended family home. And we were taught very, I have hunted, I have gone hunting. It was required in our family. Everybody has to learn how to like kill their own food, as my grandfather would say. So I have hunted, but I was taught very clearly how to use a gun. And how to do that safely, and not to ever like go get the guns, without adult supervision when I was a minor, and, all of those things. And we have our gun laws in the state have just gone crazy. They're almost non-existent, right? You can just carry a gun anywhere you want. You can pretty much shoot anybody for any reason, as long as you say you were afraid. We are that state, and we need common sense gun laws. We've had an uptick since 2020, 35% increase in gun violence. And of course, Carl can attest to this, and the city council here in Columbia and Boone County, we particularly have seen an uptick in gun violence more than we have seen before. And all of these things are important that we get behind and have some, there's only so much. If you can carry a gun anywhere you want, and you can carry it for however long you want, and you don't have to have a really any kind of license or go to any kind of safety class, if you can carry a gun into a bar, into a church, like things like that happened last weekend in the country, there for the grace of, Columbia, Boone County, and Missouri, we could have some of these issues that are happening elsewhere. We can have a mass shooting. And prayers and thoughts aren't going to help us with that. So we have to strengthen our gun laws, and that's really hard at the state legislature. I'm not going to lie, nobody touched gun laws at all this year. But if we elect more Democrats and we get some more balance back in our state legislature, then those things become more possible. And I think I'm the candidate for that. So I've been talking for like 20 minutes straight. And I love you all, but does anybody have any questions for me? Like, we can take a break and I'll answer some questions. Yeah, Mari.
Yeah, my question is, it seems like there's just such a litany of really bad legislation that gets proposed. And I know a large part of the Democrats' role in the legislature is just simply to oppose a lot of bad stuff. But do you have like a short list of things that you would like to promote, or bills that you would like to file, or concepts anyway? Of what are your priorities?
Yeah, so some of my priorities are, we did finally, we funded Medicaid expansion finally at the last minute this year in the legislature, which is good. That was the high five. Some of the bad things are in the past, I think it's Missouri Health Net, maybe it's Kids Win Missouri, we have some, the updated caseload counter. And in the last year, we lost 21 kids, fell off the Medicaid rolls. And so, we need to put those 21,000 kids probably, there's a lot of reasons for that, but some things that I worry about in our system are kids in foster care and children who are the most vulnerable in our community. And while we did some really good things this year, and I am happy to give you guys some like high fives on high policy things that happened this year, some things that, there's still some things that I would like to see. We did not manage to pass postpartum care for expanding postpartum care for mothers and babies up to 13 months. That's been something that I've personally been working on for several years. Missouri has one of the most abysmal mortality rates for moms and babies, and particularly for Black and Brown women. Seriously, I tell people, if you are pregnant in this state and you are Black or brown, you might consider just go having that baby across the state line. It is seriously like your odds improve so much. But in terms of Medicaid, we couldn't, that we could not get that passed this year. And we actually thought that might be, but we have a lot of moms and babies who could really use an extra 13 months of care as opposed to being kicked off 60 days after giving birth. Those first few years in a child's life are really key. We have a lot of, a lot of things happen. And if you can't get the medical care and access to the programs that would help, then those children are already behind. They're nutritionally behind. I don't want to talk about this baby formula thing. They're nutritionally behind. The moms aren't getting the services they need. And then we see a lot of those kids, and we see kids end up in the system when parents can't afford to take care of themselves and their babies, who are already at the margins of our community. Then often those kids end up in protective care, or we have like referrals for social services. And if we have literally $3 billion in our reserves right now at the state, $3 billion. In contrast, we usually have like 1-2 billion maybe, and then that gets brought down as they appropriate funds. This year, after all of the appropriations, we will still most likely have $2 billion in reserves. What could we do with $2 billion in Missouri to support the most marginalized families in our communities? How much like education and health access and supportive services that we could fund down to counties and to cities could we do? We could do amazing stuff, and they're just sitting on it. So that's something that I would like to see us. I would like to see us strengthen our safety net and broaden it. We're one of the, once again, Missouri, I like to say we're the show me state, and we are the show me state, and often we are the show me how low we can go state. How far down the pike can we be? How close to the bottom in spending for our marginalized families and our working families and our kids can we be? It's crazy.
There are a couple of things in chat.
Okay, let's see here. So let me go back up in chat here a little bit. Let's see here. Questions. Boone County legislative districts. And then I think this issue of making it criminal to give healthcare to trans kids is one of the worst bills ever. It's amazing in a state where the Republicans don't want the federal government to interfere. They're very happy to interfere with personal rights. Yes, they are. And, we've had 18, I will say, I run a sports organization, right? I sit on a youth sports organization. We have never one time my kids have literally been participating in both AAU sports and club sports and football, not only track, but football and basketball in this city and state since we moved here, immediately since we moved here, because I moved from I moved from Nashville to here, and they let 3-year-olds play football there. So when we came, I'd already promised my kids they could do some stuff. So we started right in on youth sports. At no point in the 13 years that I have been here and been in both the football league, the basketball league, the Catholic football league, the Catholic basketball league, and AAU sports, and the high schools and the middle schools, have we had an issue with trans kids in sports? Not once. No one's ever brought a complaint. Nobody's ever brought an issue. We had 18 attacks on that. And criminalizing, Misha has rules for these things. Misha was way ahead of the game, and they have rules for these things. So we don't even need laws for that. And that's a problem, because they are going to come back and try and criminalize parents over, they're trying to, block kids from playing sports, and there's no reason for it. Yeah, it's crazy to me. And then I see that Missouri women who seek abortions out of state are called health refugees. Yes, they are. Did somebody else have a question about trans kids before I go to the next comment in the chat?
So I see Pam also has a question, and maybe
Yeah.
Carolyn. Okay.
And maybe David, because David's unmuted too. Anybody go?
Okay. Chimene, I want you to go back to maternal mortality for
Yes,
women
ma'am.
of color. Now, I'm sure part of it was because Medicaid was not expanded, so there must have been quite a few women who had no health insurance. And would another thing be there were not enough physicians of color, and what else?
So one of the things about maternal and fetal health care is while yes, there is a little bit that is attributed to actual access to care, it actually does not matter if a woman is wealthy and educated and gets maternal care or does not. Women of color die 4 times more in childbirth and have bad outcomes more than white women in the state and elsewhere. But here it's particularly bad. Some of those reasons are just, some of them are failure to access care. You are correct. Some of them are just, old, frankly, racist tropes that, where people, doctors and nurses come with biases. They're people too, and they come with biases. And if they're not, when they're in med school and they're not trained to get rid of those biases or recognize those biases, learn about those biases, then they fall into their medical practices. And we have issues of pain control. We have issues of not believing women when they say there's a problem. We have issues of women not wanting to access care because they know there's a history of people not believing them when they say that there's a problem, right? And women in general, pregnant people in general, have always had this issue. It's just that, frankly, with and I'll put a fine point on it. Like, we dehumanize Black and brown people a lot, and we don't give them the same credit or support that we do other folks. And we dehumanize people with uteruses and pregnant, and people who can get pregnant, and people who identify as she, her. And when we do that and we act like that, we have a long history in this country of telling people, hysteria literally means wandering womb. We have a long history of not treating folks equitably in the healthcare system. And it's just 4 times worse for Black women. There are ways that we can improve that. We have a lot of doula projects happening across the state. And we had some really good we did get some things passed around doula care. We have that, like, even here in Boone County, Columbia, we have the Black Doula Collective. There's one in St. Louis now. There's one in Kansas City. Both of those projects could all be defunded with the governor's line item veto. So he didn't put that in his bill, or in his suggested budget. Parsons generally likes to, since we have the line item veto, he has a history of vetoing things that he did not put in the bill. So that's just one of those things where we'll all have to sit back and we'll be lobbying and keeping our fingers crossed that he doesn't just, wipe those things out. But there are a lot of reasons around maternal fetal mortality. But I will tell you, it's bad for all women in the state. It's not just Black and brown women. Even white women, it doesn't matter if you're wealthy, it doesn't matter if you're poor, we are still ranked behind Yemen. We just, we don't do good healthcare for women and babies here, despite having $3 billion in reserves.
Thank you.
Let
David
me
or
ask.
Mari? Yeah.
Let me ask. Who are the other candidates running, and both the Democratic and Republican side?
So I do have a
47th district.
Right. So I do have a primary. The primary, I will tell you, is Adrian Plank. I'm going to say it. I'm only going to say his name once. I don't say my opponent's name often. And if you ask me outside of this, I will probably say, please look him up. It is not to my benefit to repeat my opponent's name, so people have recognition of that. So I won't, right? So I'm Chimene Schwach running for the 47th. In the general, we do have a general opponent, and that is a man named John Martin. He is a local business owner, has not ever, to my knowledge, ever been really active in local politics. I don't know what made him want to run. I have met him. I don't mind saying I found him very dismissive. He acted like he did not want to stand within 3 feet of me when I introduced myself to him. But he is very conservative. I will say that you can look up about one of the few public things. He wrote a letter to the editor at the Missourian, I think it was September of 21, around CRT. And he might just be a little bit of right. He's at least as far right as Chuck Basie on this thing. So
Thank you.
that's what I know there.
All right,
Mari
Chimene,
or Carl? Mhm.
yeah, it's me this time. I didn't usurp Mari's time here. So my tastes run a little bit more parochial and not quite as weighty as women's rights and abortion rights and so on. And this is kind of, I'm just teasing you a little bit. I just wondered about your opinion about the council's preemption on the roll card ban. No, I'm not. I'm really not. I mean, we're not going to have the referendum, and I won't really know what the answer to that is. But my real question is, with ARPA funding, I mean, it's obviously been a topic. We have a first tranche, $12.5 million, a second tranche coming. We set 4 priorities for the first tranche. And the second tranche is really, we're talking a lot about outreach, kinds of things that you were interested in as well as a resident here. Just wondering what your opinions are from your perspective about some of the council's decisions about how we handled the first tranche and the RFPs and so on, and then the second tranche and the outreach and so on.
Whew, that's a deep question. I will say as a member of the 4th Ward, I have some thoughts on, there's some, like the ARPA money, I think is important that we utilize it. I think we have a lot of ARPA money. We have a lot of ARPA money at the county. I think we have an opportunity, even like the Opportunity Campus and working on, I think we have an opportunity to begin the funding. I know there are some people who are like, we shouldn't fund stuff that we don't necessarily have money for down the road. I will say that part of me is we have this money and it should be serving, that the money should go to those that are the most marginalized. And it should go to create services for people and to uplift services for people who are the most marginalized first. Some of you may say, I did talk about people before projects, and I have, been in front of the city council for things such as those things. I would like to see, no secret publicly, I think you guys, you record things at the city council. I've asked for more data. I like transparency and actual numbers and science behind things. I think that we should utilize those things. I think those things are at the state level. We are woeful about using data too. We get very entrenched in ideas and not actual, and sometimes eschewing facts and eschewing the science. And I think both of those things are things that we need to take into account for everything. And we need to collect data, and we should not be afraid that if we collect data that looks bad, we should not be afraid of that. It's an opportunity to improve ourselves. If we find out that we're not doing something right, or we're not serving folks in the way that we said we were going to serve them, it behooves us to figure out how to make that money work more efficiently. And if one group that has traditionally had it doesn't do that great at it, then I am not opposed to them not having it the next time just because they're a popular name group. That's me on that. Any other?
Wynn has a request in the chat.
Oh, yes. Okay. Let's see here. Please comment on climate change. Yes. And renewable energy. So, we have a climate problem, right? We have a climate problem. I will say that I say this like I've been saying it for the past 3 or 4 years. So I have a kid whose birthday is June 1st. Climate change is real. Climate action is definitely a necessary thing. It used to always be warm on my son's birthday, and we would have a pool party. And for the past really, there's been this arc of time where we can't really get to, like, it's been more floody. It's been more, it rains more. We have farmland that floods more. I do think we have to think about both climate control, and we have to think about our farming practices. We have to think about land use and where we develop our land. And we need to invest in green energy. Green energy comes with, it also comes with a price. We have to, like, we have this whole green belt issue with the wind turbines. There are a lot of people who don't want wind turbine energy, but wind turbine energy works in some aspects. But one of the things I think we can do with green energy is I think we can go to our unions and we can start pivoting and training our union, in our apprentice programs and stuff, and we can train folks. Because right now what happens is we have green energy, and then we don't have people who can work, who can even do green energy, like who can even work in those spaces and have and know what to do and how to work it. So I think we can pivot to training our unions to learn about green energy and what does building in a green way mean. And I think we can pivot to protecting farmland and soil. Mostly it's soil protection that we need to work on, I think. I definitely think if we don't start pivoting, and it's one of those things where I feel like the world is really like, oh, climate change, well, we can just sort of work on this a little bit at a time. And we keep moving the dime back. I think originally it was work on, like, even the green energy plan at the federal level was, to start affecting change by 2024. And then it was 2026, and now it's 2028. And we keep kicking the can down the road. I think we're going to have hotter summers, and we're going to have, and when we have hotter summers in town where cities like the size of ours and bigger, where there's a lot of concrete, then what happens there if we don't start managing how we produce heat and cool things down, then what happens is climate change affects the most marginalized of us first, right? Like folks who can afford to turn their air conditioning up and keep it turned up or not go outside as much, can do that. But those people who are the most marginalized, like either that's, and that does not necessarily just mean folks in the city. We have a lot of really poor working folks out in rural areas too. And if you can't afford to heat and cool your house, then it increases health responses, bodily physical responses to things. And I know some people think that we should just put solar panels on every house. I have a house where I looked at putting solar panels on, but I also have large trees around my house. I can't just put solar panels on every house. I could spend $15,000, $20,000 and put solar panels on my house. It will not effectively change my personal consumption of electricity. So we also have to be really smart about where we put solar panels and where what we ask of folks. And it's a balance. Sometimes it's just a matter of building smarter and not necessarily even having to really change, if we insulate things better and require that we not build in floodplains, things like that, development and really, frankly, developers need to take more, they need to take more impetus in building in spaces that won't create more problems down the road than they do, than up front. We have a lot of flooding in Missouri and the rivers flood. So there's a lot of building in floodplains and things like that. And then moving poor people into floodplains, and then they get displaced. And then that's not helpful either. Alice? You got to unmute yourself.
Issues. I wondered about the Grain Express, which has been held up in Missouri for, I guess, the last couple of years.
I am not, I'm just gonna tell you, I don't really know what the Grain Express is.
Oh, it's
It's
the wind
been,
farm.
yeah, it's the.
I mean, I understand the wind farms.
Grain Belt Express is
Oh,
a,
Grain Belt, yes.
yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it actually, the legislature passed a law that will make it more difficult for those kinds of projects in the future, but it didn't affect that one in particular, so it should be able to.
Yes. And we've also created some laws at the state legislature over, you know, they've been given, Greenbelt particularly was given I'm pretty certain they were given an exemption so that they can be sort of like held like a public company, and have the benefits of like a public company, but still be not a public company with private investors. That's not a good idea in my world. There are issues with contracts around those though, with the unions. I think it would be interesting if we had some union investment maybe into some of these things, which might help the worker side and labor side of that. But the wind turbines, you know, I don't think it's an easy answer. I think we do have to change our energy sources, and Americans don't like to be inconvenienced at all. As a culture, we don't like to be inconvenienced. We don't like, you know, we want to be better, and we really want to do better. But when it comes to, you know, but it's also that whole not in my backyard thing, right? Like I want that, but I don't want that right here. And that's both an education process. And frankly, it brings me all the way back to education, because we have a lot of people who just don't believe that they don't believe climate science. They don't believe science. They don't believe in these things anymore. And if you can't get people to buy into the fact that there is an actual problem, it becomes much more difficult to fix that problem at the local level. Because we can talk about it highfalutin up here, but if we can't get people on the boots on the ground to believe that there's an actual climate problem, and part of that just, it goes back to education. We have to, Missouri has a long history of not necessarily believing in, you know, we already have this problem with, we don't fully fund our, you know, our education. We don't want to fully fund our teachers. We don't believe in science. And I'm not going to say that everybody needs a college degree, but people need to be educationally curious. They need to want to learn about things, and they need to trust in that process. And we are in a space and time where half the population literally does not trust anything anyone says ever, and they don't believe the science. And then we have a group of people who, what I would say, are in power, who at the top are very smart and do understand that there is climate, but they have no problem gaslighting and spinning a tale that makes it look like all of these, you know, and utilizing people's mistrust for government and exploiting that to promote their own ends to the deficit of the rest of us.
Chimene, I'm just going to try to see if Mari can get her question in before you have to leave.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going back to the configuration of the 47th district, and my
Yes,
question
ma'am.
has to do with, do you have a sense of the proportion of rural voters versus urban voters in the current district as it's currently drawn? Or at least
Yes.
registered voters?
Yes. So essentially we have 18,000 people in the district, voters. And if we go with, you know, the actual, those folks who vote, 51% of those folks are Democrat, 49% of those are Republican. The majority of, there are more Republican voters in the rural parts of Boone County than there are Democrats. There are about maybe 2,500 to 3,100 Democrats. It just sort of depends on where you fall in the leaning category, right? So we have a bunch that, we have some folks who voted for Obama, and we have some folks who voted for Trump, same people. And so when we put that number in the system, like leaning Democrat, like those are our leaning Democrats occasionally, folks, and then folks who voted for Biden, like Trump once, but Biden the second time, like we have some leaning folks. And so that's where the discrepancy in numbers comes up in terms of strong Democrats, like 70% and up. We have about 3,000 in the county and about 9,000 in Columbia. And so you have a much, we're just much more densely populated. That is, like I said earlier, that is how we made it blue. That is where they get like the 4th ward specifically generally turns out there's both an article on Como BuzzFeed, which came out much sooner than the Tribune article. I think the Tribune article may have come out because of the article on Como BuzzFeed, but it talks about precinct turnout. And, you know, there were places, and I worked the polls at the municipal election. I was at the ARC. I was not in the 4th ward anywhere, but we had, you know, we were counting as the day progressed, you know, turnout. And as soon as we got to 19% at the ARC, I was like, oh, that means that we're going to be at like 36 or 40% in some places in the 4th ward, I bet. And that is exactly what occurred. We have several precincts that turned out between 36 and 40% in the 4th ward. And the expectation is that as long as we turn out those same voters to the, you know, and the municipal election is usually has lower turnouts than the primary and the general. So if we expect, you know, if we had that, so we expect a very high turnout in the 4th ward specifically for the primary. And then of course, for the general, we expect a high turnout. Also, even the precincts in the 5th were pretty high. I think the highest turnout, there was one precinct in the 5th that really turned out, you know, at also at like the 36%, somewhere up in their level. So as long as the Democrats in the 4th ward, frankly, and the 5th ward, those in Columbia vote, there's almost no, you know, in the general, we will be blue. And for those of us in the primary, you know, if you, much like the mayoral race, much like things that happen in municipal elections, generally where the 4th ward goes is where the vote is, where the wind goes.
Well, we're up to the 1 o'clock time frame.
Yes.
And I want to express my appreciation on behalf of the Muleskinners and the Muleskinners who have asked these penetrating questions. I appreciate you being here and giving us the rundown.
I appreciate all of you so much. I put my chimeneschwach.com in the chat. You can find me on social media pretty much at Chimene for Missouri. It's Chimene, the number 4, and then MO at both Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, if that's your thing. But you know, love seeing you all. Always love Muleskinners. I'm really hoping that we get Muleskinners back out in person at some point, so that I think you'll find that more folks will show up. But I really appreciate your flexibility today. I would very much appreciate anybody who lives in the 47th vote on August 2nd. But if you would like to contact me also, here, I'll do this too. Most of you know my phone number, but I'm putting my phone number, that's my cell phone number. Feel free to text me or call me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chimene. Thank you. And a round of applause, please.
All right. I'm going to step off now. I appreciate y'all.